Joab is in Addis today. Excellent, Joab. I hope you're having some good injera and some good coffee.
Yeah. We're celebrating our Easter now.
Yes. Are you based full-time in Addis, or you just, I thought you were in Nairobi, Joab?
Yeah, I'm based full-time in Nairobi, but working from Addis this week.
Okay, excellent. Yes, Makonnen, no, we can't hear you, Makonnen. I think your microphone is not working. You're still on mute. No, we can't hear you at all, Makonnen. Okay.
He's on mute. He's on mute. He's on mute. Yeah.
He's on mute, but I'm seeing he's put a note here that he wants to know if we can hear him, but unfortunately we can't, Makonnen. Maybe you can log out and log back in.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Makonnen. Salam, dana way, kwandana mata. Dana, thank you. Welcome. Nice Dana. Thank you. Nice to have a fellow Abasha on the call. Okay, so my colleague Vivian Naidu has been tracking all the registrations, and Viv, I know, told me that there were over 35 people who had registered. We're at 19 participants now, but since we only have 19 minutes, I think we want to just get started. Viv, can you already put up, share the presentation, Viv, so we can see the agenda item for the day? Excellent. Can everyone see everyone can see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so everybody, I would like to encourage you, if you have questions, please to go ahead and put them in the chat as we go through. I know Makonnen has very enthusiastically already sent some questions in, which we will try to address. Thank you, Makonnen. So we just wanted to go through. Viv, you can already go to what we'll cover today. And I'm looking at my slides here as well, so apologies for any confusion. But as we said in the invite, what we hope to cover today, Viv, you can go to the first slide, thank you, is, what is the People's Vaccine Alliance? So again, to introduce myself, my name is Maaza Seyoum, and I'm with the African Alliance, which is currently coordinating the work of the People's Vaccine Alliance in Africa. So given that our comrades in Asia for the People's Vaccine Alliance have already held their first team meeting for comrades around the continent, we were encouraged to do the same in Africa because there's been so much going on with vaccine equity work. And we wanted to make sure that all of you who were able to join us are at least aware of what the People's Vaccine Alliance is and what we are doing. Then we will have a brief, I know we could have a whole 90-minute discussion about this, but we'll have a brief conversation on the role of the African Union and Africa CDC on COVID-19 vaccine access across the continent. And my colleague Tian Johnson, who sits on the community engagement arm of the Vaccine Delivery Alliance, is here on hand for that. And then we wanted to give some highlights from the last few months from across the continent. And that's when I will ask our comrades from Oxfam and Action AID, who are co-hosting this meeting today, to start us off and talk about the activities that they have been involved in related to vaccine equity in the last couple of months. And then also I know Joab from Action AID, Joab from Oxfam and Buba from Action AID also each had one organization that they wanted to call on that they know has done some interesting work on vaccine equity in the last couple of months that they would call on Joab and Buba, I hope you can see the list of participants who are in attendance. So just to make sure that the person that you wanted to call on is here, and then we'll also open it up if we have time for all of you to let us know what you have been working on in terms of vaccine equity for the last few months. And then we wanted to talk about advocacy opportunities for the rest of Q2 for May and June. As we know, this is really sort of a critical time for pushing for vaccine equity. And there are some activities that I will go through, or at least some advocacy opportunities that are available that the People's Vaccine Alliance has identified for May. But one of the priorities of the People's Vaccine Alliance is to make sure that the areas of focus that are of interest to the Global South are included. So we want to find out what you all know that we are not aware of, that we can make sure we include in our discussions going forward. And then, as we said in the email, probably most importantly, we want to talk about next steps. What is the best way to coordinate our work going forward? For those of you who want to join the People's Vaccine Alliance as organizations, we will let you know how to do that. But even if you would rather be an observer and participate in vaccine equity work with us, we would like to know the best ways to collaborate with all of you going forward. So those are the agenda items for the day. As I said, please feel free to put questions or comments in the chat and we will try to address them. Okay, Viv, next slide, please. Okay, so just, what is the People's Vaccine Alliance? It is not an organization. It is a coalition of organizations and activists united under a common aim of campaigning for what we call a people's vaccine. And this would be on shared knowledge we're advocating. And the point is to have a freely available vaccine to everyone, everywhere, a global common good. At the moment, there are 44 organizations all over the world who have signed up as official members of the Alliance. And it's also backed by past and present world leaders, health experts, faith leaders, and economists. Viv, go ahead, next slide, please. Thank you. So what are we calling for? A free of charge vaccine for everyone, everywhere, distributed according to needs, no exceptions. And here, the goal is open sharing of vaccine science, technology, and know-how. And that is through the WHO CTAP. And again, that's something that if people have questions about, we can try and address in the discussion. But CTAP is the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool launched by WHO in partnership with the government of Costa Rica and 40 other member states. And that's really the idea of being able to scale up manufacturing and making sure that the knowledge is shared in order to allow the manufacturing of vaccines to happen globally. So that's really one of the things that the People's Vaccine Alliance is calling for, and also global manufacturing and distribution plan and cost price vaccines, investment in production capacity, and also the capacity building for health workers. Okay, go ahead, Viv. All right, so what is the current state of play? And I think all of you are very aware of this, given that most of the continent is still struggling to get good access to vaccines. So 9 out of 10 people in the majority of low and middle income countries are set to miss out this year on vaccines. COVAX will reach 20% coverage at best. And I think many of us are familiar with COVAX, but if there are questions about what COVAX is, we can also get into that in the question and answer. And basically countries are being left behind to bid in the open market and pay high prices for small volumes of vaccines. At the moment, our cousins, friends, colleagues in rich countries generally have more vaccines than they need. They bought up the vast majority of the supply. There are some supply delays, as we've heard, which have meant further delays for low and middle income countries. The pharmaceutical monopolies are being fiercely defended. And also there's some distracting discourse, talking about COVAX and how that's working and maybe focusing on donations. And that's something that I know the African Union and Africa CDC have also been discussing. So hopefully we can get into that. Next slide, please, Viv. Okay. And now part of the work of the People's Vaccine Alliance has been the focus on the TRIPS waiver. And I hope you all can see this. this map here. I know it's hard to see because there's so many spots, but the TRIPS is the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. It's a WHO agreement, and it's the most comprehensive multilateral agreement on intellectual property and IP. This is out of the World Trade Organization. And at the moment, as you all know, South Africa and India have submitted a proposal at the World Trade Organization to temporarily waive certain IP rights under the TRIPS agreement. And this is what many of the rich countries have been blocking. So when you see here, the yellow star are sponsors and co-sponsors of the TRIPS waiver. Then you have countries that are full supporters of the TRIPS waiver, and the countries that we as the People's Vaccine Alliance are really focused on are the opponents. So those are countries that you see with, you know, the orange X on top of them, you know, so we're talking about the US, which is still blocking the TRIPS waiver, but Joe Biden has been apparently recently making a few noises that he might be willing to participate in advocating for waiving of the TRIPS waiver. The UK is still blocking the TRIPS waiver, Australia, Norway, Japan, and Brazil, notably in the global south, is also blocking the TRIPS waiver. Thank you, Viv. Next slide. Okay, so who is the People's Vaccine Alliance trying to influence? Rich country governments, obviously, because they're the ones who could push pharma companies to share the science and technology. Pharma companies themselves we're trying to pressure. And then, you know, there are some low and middle income countries that are not pushing as energetically for the TRIPS waiver. And also here, this is something that we want to hear from you all. What could we do as a People's Vaccine Alliance, or what could we do as African advocates to push our governments in other ways that would allow for a more accessible and equitable vaccine? And also trying to change the narrative amongst the public and the media. I have found, and I don't know if you all agree, that in the last few weeks, at least, there seems to be in the media quite a bit of discussion about intellectual property rights and the TRIPS waiver. There seem to be, you know, both media organizations and just individuals posting more regularly about the need for vaccines to be freely available. So hopefully the People's Vaccine Alliance is one of the groups that has played a part in that influence. Okay, Viv, next slide, please. Okay, and what do we need? What's the plan for influence? Mass public pressure, media attention, targeted advocacy, and integration of priorities. And this is really where our group comes in. And something that I have learned in the time that I have been part of the People's Vaccine Alliance, and I hope Joab and Buba, Joab from Oxfam, Buba from Action AID, both very active members of the People's Vaccine Alliance. Oxfam and UNAIDS, I forgot to mention, are the founding members of the People's Vaccine Alliance. So if anybody from UNAIDS is here, and I know Oxfam definitely is with Joab and others, you can just talk a little bit about the need for the flexibility, because things do change on a very regular basis. So it's about trying to be flexible and responsive. Okay, next slide, please, Viv. And here, I know that I've gone over a little bit, but just talking about recent achievements. There was March 11th, a People's Vaccine Global Day of Action that included an online rally, which had statements from Graça Machel, the Archbishop of Cape Town. Bernie Sanders made a statement, and that's what we had linked there, but it's a few minutes long, and I don't think we have time to share that. But, you know, given that Bernie Sanders does have quite, Senator Bernie Sanders of the US state of Vermont does have quite a wide following. So it was really gratifying to see him advocating loudly for the TRIPS waiver. There was a global survey of epidemiologists, including African scientists. And that, Viv, if you're able to hit that link, that would be great just to see. There was a lot of global media around the epidemiologist survey. So those were, and Viv, if your internet is a bit spotty, we can kick it back to me as well. And I can do that if we have time here. All right, let me do that. Viv has kicked it back to me. Let me.
Maaza, I got it. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay, but your screen is not sharing at the moment. But yes, so as Viv is doing that, so there was a a survey done amongst epidemiologists where the result was that the longer vaccines are not shared widely, there is a fear of the virus, as we have seen in many countries, mutating, and that the vaccines will not be as effective going forward. So this is just to show you just a quick link in terms of, and Viv, I just wanted to show the headline, and then we can go back to the presentation. Thanks, Viv. But that's just to show you some of the advocacy of the People's Vaccine Alliance and trying to take the results from the survey and then push those into global media. There was an open letter to President Biden, and that's really to try and pressure him to allow for the TRIPS waiver, you know, because as we know, the US does have quite a bit of influence. A couple of the pharmaceutical companies are headquartered in the US that have COVID-19 vaccines. So that was a letter, an open letter signed by over 170 global leaders, printed in the Financial Times and picked up by global media as well. Viv, we can leave that just because we don't have that much time left. There have been many opinion pieces in newspapers around the world, and I would be happy, you know, later in our discussion today, we'll be talking about the best way to communicate going forward, and we can make sure for those of you who are not members of the People's Vaccine Alliance and would rather not join, we can find another way to share all of these products with you, just so you can see. For those of you who do join the People's Vaccine Alliance, those are available in the internal document dump that the People's Vaccine Alliance has set up. There is a global petition which has been signed by over 1 million people for the waiving of IP rights. And just yesterday, there was a call to action by faith leaders from around the world. So that was both Christian and Muslim faith leaders and Jewish faith leaders, and the Dalai Lama kind of coinciding with this Easter Ramadan period, encouraging the world, encouraging global leaders to allow for this TRIPS waiver so a vaccine could be available for all. So now upcoming opportunities, at least as the People's Vaccine Alliance has seen them, there's a G7 meeting, there's a full World Trade Organization General Council meeting, and we can go through these in more detail at the end of our discussion if we have time. For us on the continent, May 25th is Africa Day. We wanted to talk about whether there were opportunities there that we could use, but that is some of what the People's Vaccine Alliance has been trying to do, is look forward to the next 3 months and see what advocacy opportunities are available and to try and develop actions and opportunities around those. So for example, March 11th, which I mentioned to you, was the 1-year anniversary since COVID-19 had been described as a pandemic. That was a day where there was global action in terms of, you know, protests in different countries, as well as the online rally that I mentioned, where Graça Machel and Bernie Sanders and others released statements. Next slide, Viv. Okay, so here, in terms of how the People's Vaccine Alliance coordinates, there is a great pool of documents. Oxfam, one of Joab's colleagues, has developed an amazing database in Nairobi, out of the Nairobi office, with, you know, vaccine coverage and epidemiological data that is available. There are really good graphics available that can be used for social media or for posters or elsewhere. There are organizational contacts, obviously, of other members for collaboration in our various regions as necessary. Or I see that we have a colleague from Spain on the call here today. So if there are opportunities for collaboration with people in the global north as well. There is a bi-weekly alliance-wide meeting, but there are also subgroups for strategizing and planning. The subgroups are policy and advocacy, influential, so that's really how to reach out to and get the voices of influential people in our different regions to chime in. So, you know, the Archbishop of Cape Town was one, Graça Machel is another. There's some talk about trying to get Cyril Ramaphosa to make, you know, a more enthusiastic statement leading up to the G7 or the G20. So that's what that group does. There's a campaigns and media group, a statistics group. That's the one that's led by Joab's colleague in Nairobi, and a pharmaceuticals advisory group. So that really thinks about how to target pharmaceutical companies directly. There's an active Twitter campaign with the People's Vaccine hashtag. They've been very good at the People's Vaccine Alliance about boosting our Twitter feeds as well when we have an event or an activity. So a lot of coordination in-house and a lot of opportunity to share documents as well. Next slide, Viv. Okay, and that's it for now. We will talk as we go forward. I want to give people the opportunity to maybe ask a few questions now, and then at the end we can talk about how to coordinate going forward. Thank you, Viv, for sharing my slides. And I'm just looking at the questions here. Yes, thank you, Tian, for letting people know. The slides will be shared, the recording will be shared, and we are committing to get you a report of today's meeting and next steps and action items early next week, just so we can gather momentum. And let's see here. There is a question, I believe, Busi, you had a question here about COVAX. Can you tell us what your question about COVAX is? Is your microphone working?
Yes.
And tell us what organization you're from, please.
Oh, I'm with the Africa Health Research Institute. So it's a research organization based in Northern KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa.
Excellent. Welcome.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I'm hearing this COVAX term for the first time here, and maybe just some general overview would help, and then I can go and search for more. Thank you.
Okay, so COVAX, and please, others who are very well versed, please feel free to chime in. But COVAX is an initiative led by 3 global organizations: Gavi, which is a global alliance for vaccines and immunizations; CEPI, which is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovations. It's a Norwegian association. Interestingly, Norway is one of the countries that is blocking the TRIPS waiver, and the World Health Organization. So Busi, COVAX is led by Gavi, CEPI, and the World Health Organization. It is currently the global mechanism that is pooling COVID-19 vaccines to, in theory, allow for access for poorer countries. So 170 countries have agreed to work together and to try and buy vaccines together in order to be able to donate to poorer countries. I think what people are concerned about with COVAX, and others please chime in, is that at the moment it has not been as transparent about the deals that it is making as it should be with pharmaceutical companies. So rich countries, are buying up vaccines. In theory, the COVAX mechanism will lead to donations to poorer countries, but civil society, developing countries have not been involved in the decision-making process, and it has not been very transparent. So, our goal in terms of COVAX would be for deals with pharmaceutical companies to be published, developing country governments and civil society members to be involved in decision-making. And I really want to open it up. Busi, I hope that answers your question about what COVAX is, at least. But I would like to open it up to, I know that Oxfam has some very strong views on COVAX. So Joab, I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add to that, or if you think that I summarized it adequately.
I think you did, just to say that, most of the developing countries, most of the vaccines that have been received so far are through the COVAX facility. But the thing is that pharmaceutical companies and developed nations are trying to hide behind the COVAX facility to give small donations instead of actually removing the TRIPS, so that developing countries can be able to manufacture at scale. The second thing about COVAX, last year, there was commitment that actually developing countries through COVAX will also start vaccinating at the same time as developed nations. So that never happened. To date, COVAX has only, I think, met, 1 in 5 doses of what it had committed to deliver by May 2021. So those are the challenges. So rich countries hiding behind the COVAX facility, and also pharmaceutical companies hiding behind the COVAX facility to give the little donations, which we do appreciate, but much more needs to happen.
Thank you, Joab, for that. And Busi, I see that as we're talking, Tian has been sharing links in the chat. And I know that Tian also has some additional information that they can add about COVAX. So I think since we have already gone over time, that was ideally, I was hoping that that intro on the People's Vaccine Alliance would only be about 20 minutes. So Tian, I would like to now hand over to you to give a brief intro on what the African Alliance is, as well as your work with the African Union and Africa CDC and how that relates to the broader picture of vaccine access around the continent. Go ahead, Tian.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Maaza. And just again, on behalf of the Alliance, thank you so much to everyone for taking time out of your schedules to join us on this Friday. I'm sure throughout this pandemic we've been zoomed out, but I just can't resist the temptation to add about COVAX. Our historical position has really been from the outset. You know, we've seen governments who continually deflect their responsibilities by referring to COVAX. So in the early days of the pandemic, the constant refrain was when they were asked, where's the vaccines? We were told, oh, COVAX, COVAX, COVAX. And of course, COVAX is spectacularly overwhelmed. It's unable to meet its targets. It's grossly underfunded. There's virtually no transparency. It is an unelected, unaccountable body. We cannot hold COVAX to account for anything that they do. They've tied governments in knots in terms of their regulations and conditions, in terms of vaccines, in terms of how these vaccines are procured. In the early days, they actually requested a lot of, for example, in South Africa, a lot of our national regulations, as far as procurement goes, to be sidestepped and totally done away with. So while COVAX is an absolutely critical and essential component of how we get vaccines to communities and from the factory into arms, we really have to be aware that COVAX, in our view at least, does not represent equitable access. COVAX is not set up to result in equitable access. That responsibility has to remain at the core of our governments. We also can't be relying on benevolence or charity to get leftover stocks of vaccines. While that would be great, especially at this moment, in a country like South Africa, where we have not even started our vaccine rollout, we do have to constantly reinforce the message that we need to break these silos of confidentiality, these silos of non-disclosure agreements. The fact that our elected officials who are in office can turn around and tell civil society and communities that they can't comment because of a non-disclosure agreement is absolutely outrageous. And I think really a pure form of state capture if a pharmaceutical company is silencing publicly elected officials. So I'll stop there and just speak a bit about the African Alliance and our role with the African CDC, which falls under the African Union. I will attempt to share my screen and I'll just go through these slides very quickly. And of course we can share them after the call. So can you see my slides?
Yes, Tian, we can.
So this is just a brief overview of the work. So the African Alliance and our partners sit on a structure called AVDA, the African Vaccine Delivery Alliance. And our role, of course, is to ensure that vaccines get to communities as soon as possible. That is underway, and vaccines have been procured and distributed across the continent. Member states are able to go onto a dashboard and select what vaccines they would like in terms of vaccine candidates. And the structure has allocated these vaccines to countries based on their population. So I'll explain a bit more about that. This is just really in terms of how we feel we will accelerate expanded access. So there's really three components here when we're talking about fast tracking regulatory decisions as a critical component of our work. And the first is to accelerate African involvement in clinical development. We've been saying this for, I think, over 2 decades now, from HIV vaccines now to COVID vaccines, to saying we have to seriously look at our African capacity to manufacture. Since the onset of this pandemic, we've had manufacturers saying that we are ready to manufacture, but we need to break this patent. Give us the recipe. Give us the recipe for this vaccine so we can manufacture and get these vaccines to people who need them and need them urgently. But of course, as Maaza had pointed, we have countries in the EU, countries like Norway, who have materially stood up for inequality. These are champions for inequality. And the mind boggles because countries like Norway have a long history of investing in democracy, of investing in citizen participation, of investing in strengthened health systems. And that really just goes against what we're seeing now, where we're seeing these wealthy countries stand up and say, absolutely not. And of course, we had Bill Gates echo that yesterday. So these are components and groups who are standing in the way of us getting these vaccines. Of course, in South Africa, we are filling and finishing vaccines and sending them out of the country. A portion of those vaccines will remain in country. And of course, a range of these vaccine candidates feed in to the African Vaccine Delivery Alliance, which is the body that we lead community engagement and communications for. The second pillar there is really looking at how do we ensure access to sufficient vaccine supply. You know, this has a direct impact on the fact that just in the last few days, you know, the DRC is on the verge of returning just under 2 million vaccines back to the facility, which are on the verge of expiring. We've just secured 2.9 million doses of a vaccine for Nigeria. Ethiopia is coming on board in 2 weeks' time, where we'll see their doses arrive through this African mechanism. So again, it's about strengthening African responses and African mechanisms and lessening our collective reliance on partners in the global south, sorry, in the global north. And of course, the third component is really looking at, apart from regulation, how do we get these vaccines to communities? There's been endless discussions around refrigeration and cold chain and logistics. And that's all well and good, but we saw it with antiretrovirals, we saw it with PrEP, we saw it with the inner condom, we saw it with early stage work around the vaginal microbicide, that all of these investments, these millions and billions of dollars of science, of research, of work, of communities putting themselves on the line to participate in vaccine trials, all of that will mean absolutely nothing if we cannot get vaccines into people's arms. And right now we have clinical trial participants who made in part these vaccines possible, who are looking and seeing their colleagues in the global north, predominantly white colleagues, taking vaccine selfies. So we're seeing partners and people in the global north getting vaccinated. But yet the very people who took part in the clinical research to make this happen are being told of 2023. That's an absolute outrage and it's absolutely unacceptable. And if there's one of the many things that civil society should be amplifying our voices, it is really right now that we have wealthy countries stopping access to a vaccine. So I'll skip some of the regulatory stuff and just go straight into the structure, which is really focused. So that's logistics. I won't cover that. I'm not going to cover patient flow, but we've covered everything from building and developing national vaccine strategies right up to vaccination sites in hotels and conference centers and sports stadiums, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the slide I really just wanted to touch on. A pillar of our work, which was a result of advocacy internally within these structures, was to set up a community engagement pillar. So we have a logistics pillar, a manufacturing pillar, a financing pillar, et cetera, and various entities lead those pillars. And so of course the African Alliance leads that pillar, which is really looking at community engagement and what that means in the context of risk communication. So we had the AstraZeneca stoppage a few weeks ago. That really impacted vaccine confidence and vaccine hesitancy. Right now, we're dealing with Johnson & Johnson that has just come on board or back on board after a period of intense media around blood clots, around these 6 people who developed these blood clots, one of whom died, one was in a hospital. And so some of the work we're doing right now, which we'll release next week, is a set of communications materials targeted at communities to really walk with communities along this journey of understanding. Basic issues. What is the blood clot? How do blood clots fit into this broader picture of the vaccine discussion we're having now? Will I get a blood clot if I get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? What about if I've already had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? What does that mean for me? So it's really important, and we try to the best of our ability within the limited resources we have as a very small NGO to really ensure that communities are brought along in terms of basic access to information. So I'll stop sharing there and just say that we welcome support and expressions of interest to join this community engagement pillar. We've partnered with several regional civil society networks. We have partners across the continent, but we constantly want to reach out and make the circle bigger and really use our positionality within these structures to be accountable to civil society. So ideally, we'd like to circle back to you before key meetings and say, this is the agenda of what's upcoming, what are the issues in your context and in your work that you would like us to raise, what's been on your mind in terms of manufacturing, in terms of distribution, do you have a communications need, et cetera, et cetera. So in the next month, we'll be finalizing what we've called a solidarity package. This is a package really of technical support. It's a package that will work with national civil society groups across Africa to ensure that there's a skill set there that is able to identify trends, not only in social media, but also on community radio, because of course we acknowledge not everyone has access to unlimited high-speed data. That's a reality on the continent. And so we have to ensure that we bring these communities, all of our communities along with these discussions. So we encourage you to send an email to myself, tian@africanalliance.org.za, or to Maaza, or to our info address. We will get it, and we will add you to that list to ensure that you at least are kept up to date with what Africa is doing to meet the current need. So having said that, thank you, Maaza, and happy to take any questions or comments.
Great, Tian, thank you so much. So I know that my brother Makondan, I can see he's already up. He had some questions for you already, and Makondan, I can see that you've already unmuted yourself. So we can start with you maybe, if you have a couple of questions for Tian. We might not be able to answer all because we want to leave some time for the discussion, but please go ahead and ask one of your questions.
Thank you, Maaza. I have some 3 questions to ask. First is, how can I become a member of the Alliance? Second is, do we have other alternative mechanisms for vaccine access other than COVAX? I mean, do we have other platforms, like a separate mechanisms for the distribution and accessibility of the COVAX vaccines other than COVID vaccines other than COVAX in Africa or maybe in Ethiopia? My third question is, how about the research and the development program in this in the Alliance? What does the Alliance think about the research? I mean, I saw that there are clinical issues that we are going to address. But how about like research and HMI issues? And, how do we capture data and other issues in the delivery of vaccine in Africa or in Ethiopia?
Okay, so Makondan, your microphone was a bit scratchy, but the first question I think you asked was, how do organizations on this call join the People's Vaccine Alliance if they're not already? That one is fortunately very straightforward. You will just send me an email if you are interested in being a member of the People's Vaccine Alliance, and I will connect you to the appropriate person. They would send you a short form that you need to fill explaining what your organization does, and they would also let you know what the objectives of, or reiterate, because you've heard them today, the objectives of the People's Vaccine Alliance, and they would ask you if you can stand by those. You know, obviously, if you're a group that is really dedicated only to donations and does not want to push for, you know, intellectual property shifts, then that would be complicated, and maybe you should not be a full member of the People's Vaccine Alliance. So the first one is quite easy. Please send me an email and I'll put it in the chat. The second one, I think you asked, what are the other mechanisms that Ethiopia and other African countries have access to, aside from COVAX, to access COVID-19 vaccines? And there, Tian, maybe I'll let you speak to that. I know that some countries have been accessing Chinese vaccines, and there's some talk of the Russian vaccine on its way. But Tian, I'll let you speak to that. And then the third question, I think you were asking, what is the People's Vaccine Alliance interest or involvement in research and development on the continent more broadly? Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for the great presentation. But a bit, I would like to add more about HMI, health system related information, capturing system.
Okay, okay.
What do you think about it?
Okay, so that one I can tell you that the People's Vaccine Alliance has not been involved in health systems management issues at all, but Tian, maybe you can speak to whether AVDA is addressing those as part of the African Union and Africa CDC work. So Tian, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Maaza. So I'm going to put, and thank you, Mekonnen, for the question. I'm going to put a link in the chat. That is our African CDC dashboard. On that dashboard, you will be able to see the cases, of course, our current cases. You will be able to see numbers of deaths and recoveries. You'll be able to see that per country, and you'll be able to sort the data accordingly. I will also put a second link on the chat that will also show you some of the disaggregated data. So on the African CDC link that I put on the chat, you'll be able to see the supply, how many vaccines have been administered, what type of vaccine has been acquired, what is COVAX bringing to the party, what is the bilateral supply chain looking like, and what is AVAT bringing. And of course, AVAT is that structure within the African Union and African CDC that has been securing the doses of the vaccine. Of course, our aim is just under 700 million doses within this year. We're fairly well on track to getting those. But of course, with all of these issues, we are subject to manufacturing. You know, we've seen even some of the wealthiest countries in the world do not have access. And of course, because we're not manufacturing it fast enough, and we're not manufacturing it fast enough because pharma, in collaboration with wealthy countries, are standing in the way of us doing that. So I'll share those two links, and again, happy to have separate conversations if you'd like me to take you through some of the materials and the numbers. Thanks, Maaza.
Okay, thank you. Friends, I would, just because we are moving along in time, I would say please drop any questions in the chat, and even if we don't address them today, we will compile them and do our best to answer them in writing. I would now like to hand over, as we said, the next point of the discussion was going to be just a quick overview of the interesting activities related to vaccine equity that have been taking place in the last few months. You know, there are many, I saw a note that Busi put in the chat that it's so overwhelming to keep up that sometimes she misses things. And I feel like we all have that sentiment. And I know that Joab and Buba in particular with Oxfam and Action AID have been involved with many interesting activities. So Joab, I'll start with you, and then Buba, I'm glad to see you're back, you next. And if you could let us know either from your part as Oxfam, Joab, or any of your collaborators, any interesting activities that have taken place in the last couple of months.
Thanks, Maaza. A lot has happened on the continent and across the world. You know, I think for me, I'll want to pass over this opportunity to anyone on the call to share what they've been doing. If someone would like to share what, as an organization or as an individual, has been doing with regards to the people's vaccine or access to vaccines, feel free to share. If you don't feel free, I see some people on the call. I can call out your names. So I can see Njoki on the call, Chennai, or anyone else who wants to share.
And as people are warming up, Joab, or thinking about what they want to say, Buba, maybe, I know that Action Aid also has been very busy. So if you have anything top of mind that you would like to share with us, or if there's a specific collaborator that you would like to put on the spot to share their activities with us. Buba, I think you're on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my connection is very bad, but I'll try as much as possible to speak up. Yeah, from Action Aid side, sorry, my video also wouldn't be, because of my internet connection, I wouldn't be showing the video.
Don't worry.
Okay, from Action Aid, yeah, we are looking at the vaccine campaign from a broader sense of issues, because we've seen that it's part of a bigger problem that we are faced with as the world.
Buba, I'm sorry, your connection has...
Of the weakness have actually been laid to bear. So as a result, our approach to the people's vaccine is from that perspective, where we look at it from where, for instance, from equality sense, because we've seen that the inequality gap between the rich and poor is increasing, and that's why the richer countries are able to provide vaccines for their people, whilst we are not. But from another sense, we are looking at it from the point of view where our people are not able to also access the cost of the vaccine. Like, for instance, as a result of a lot of macroeconomic factors, related to borrowing trends, and also the debt issues that they are grappling with. So that's why what we do is we convene to have solutions to some of these problems. Like recently, we had a discourse around the Africa finance ministers. We are looking at how Africa's debt could be cancelled so that they can be able to provide vaccines, accessible vaccines to her people. So that is the other angle is around the tax issue, because we feel that tax justice is a key element of Africa's financing problems, because we've seen that a lot of Africa's resources have been pillaged and due to either tax holidays or illicit finance flows. So all those are mechanisms where, if addressed properly, Africa could be able to have enough resources to finance our development endeavors, including providing vaccines for her. Lastly, and not the least, is on the TRIPS work that we also started. We are following.
I'm sorry, Buba. We've just lost you, but I think we caught a little. Oh.
Oops. Can you hear me?
Unfortunately, it's very it's very spotty, Buba. I'm sorry, but we got until the part where you were talking about pressuring. You talked about debt, inequality, and pressuring the finance ministers as well. So Buba, I think because your line is spotty, we should leave it at that. But what I will say is maybe Buba, what we'll do is we'll ask you to include in the report maybe just a few lines. We can put Action Aid's work there.
Okay.
So Joab, I will kick it back to you, or maybe Joab, one of your comrades. Oh, and I see Suhail is here. Suhail Omar from People's Vaccine Kenya. So Suhail, I know you've just joined. So maybe I can put you on the spot, because I know that you even had an event just today So maybe we can put you on the spot. We're just at the point where we're talking about what groups around the continent have been doing in terms of vaccine equity in the last couple of months before we look forward to opportunities for the rest of the quarter. Suhail, can I put you on the spot?
Hi, Maaza. Yes, you can.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Suhail, and I am currently leading the People's Vaccine Kenya campaign efforts in Kenya. So in summary, a lot of the work we're doing is focusing on advocacy, litigation, access to information, and awareness about the vaccine. So I think one of the key issues we're facing, especially in Kenya, and I know a lot of you practicing, especially within the Global South, understand is we have two challenges. As we fight and advocate for free and fair distribution of the vaccine from big pharma, the waiver of the TRIPS waiver, we have to come back home and fight and advocate the same with our government, because sometimes we're speaking about these things, for example, the TRIPS waiver, but our governments aren't really interested in such policy mechanisms or engaging with them. So far we have worked with government, which is always very slippery because we have sent out a few access to information letters, most of them no response till now. The legal period of 14 days has passed, we're months now later, and I think now the solution in sight is litigation. So I do think a key challenge we've been facing is the conversation and the discussion of such things between the community and governments, and then the community and the international actors as per se. So I think, Maaza, if I've missed anything or you want to get anything in particular, maybe you can ask and then I can just answer directly to that.
No, I think that's perfect, Suhail. Thank you. We just wanted to give a flavor of what's been going on the continent. And Joab, I know you had called on one, let's give one other person an opportunity. You had called on one other person, Joab. I don't know if that person feels comfortable speaking about what they've been doing. Joab, are you still with us?
Yes, thanks. Maybe, you highlighted what has been happening. So maybe just to share a bit of what we've been doing as civil society and Oxfam in cooperation with others. So on the 11th of March, for instance, a couple of African organizations and international organizations came together and did a civil society statement that actually was reflected in various media outlets, but also we saw that the language of that statement being used by some governments, for example, Kenya, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in response to the red listing of Kenya by the UK government in response, actually, you could tell that most of the words actually came from the statement that the civil society did, and made certain demands to our own governments, international financial institutions, pharmaceutical companies, and the developed countries, the African Union, and also the developed countries that actually are blocking the TRIPS waiver. Other than that, we've also been mobilizing African leaders actually to support the TRIPS waiver. The letter that went to President Biden was signed by some of the former presidents from the continent and Nobel laureates from the continent. Last year, we started this last year in July when in preparation for the World Health Assembly, and we got a couple of African leaders to actually call for a people's vaccine as early as July last year. So we got the chair of the Africa CDC, the chair of the African Union, the chair of the African Union Commission itself, and a couple of other leaders from the continent to call for a people's vaccine. As early as July last year, we could see the president of Ghana, the president of Senegal, all signing on to the letter that was calling for a people's vaccine during last year's World Health Assembly. So in brief, that is it. But from this meeting, I know many of us are doing things, are doing stuff separately in relation to the people's vaccine. It could be at the national level, it could be at the regional level, or at the continental level. I think as one of the outcomes of this meeting, we would like to see how we can coordinate better the different efforts that each one of us is engaged in, and how we can link national conversations to regional, to continental, and to global conversation. Yeah, so how do we share information more? How do we get to join each other in either individual actions or collective actions? So maybe we can discuss that in the next session. Maaza, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Joab. And as I mentioned, Oxfam and UNAIDS were the founding members of the People's Vaccine Alliance, and we're always very heartened by Oxfam's continued enthusiasm and support. Much of the documentation that if you join the People's Vaccine Alliance that you will have access to has been developed by Oxfam. You know, and just before we go on, and I do want to go to the section that Joab has just highlighted, you know, the main point of this call was really to try and brainstorm on how we could coordinate better. I have mentioned how people can join the People's Vaccine Alliance. Tian, just remind us, have you shared how people can join AVDA? Is that clear? Have you put your info in the chat? I mean, we will do this in the report as well, but I know that there's a lot of interest in the African Vaccine Delivery Alliance. Tian?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again, Maaza. So we've just signed our terms of reference yesterday, actually. We've been working on this since the outset of the pandemic, starting with some engagements with the doctors and communities within Wuhan. But now that we've finalized this African Union, African CDC structure, I think I shared previously, but just a reminder, you can email myself, my email address is in the chat, or info@africanalliance.org.za, just to be clear in terms of membership, because there have been some questions. So becoming a member of the community engagement pillar will not translate into membership of the Delivery Alliance. That structure has already been set up, and the leadership has been appointed by the director of the CDC, Dr. John Kekasong. But we would like to encourage you to join us on that specific pillar. Membership is open to any African structure that has a track record of community engagement and is African-led. International organizations and INGOs, of course, are always free to reach out and express solidarity and interest, and we'll certainly lean on them and call on INGOs and international organizations to be on standby to support where needed, because it's really important for us as the African Union and the African CDC to really cement African ownership of this response, whilst also recognizing the importance of global solidarity. So this particular call is really open for African-led, African-based organizations who regard one of their roles as meaningfully engaging communities on these issues. So please do feel free, info or tian@africanalliance.org.za. Thanks, Maaza.
Great. Thank you so much. So now we're sort of keeping time, which makes me happy. We have enough time to do kind of the important next step. Please, comrades, keep your questions coming in the chat, and whatever we're not able to address today, we will put in the notes. But can everyone see my slide now? Can people see my slide?
No.
No, okay, sorry about that. I'm trying to share my slide. Let me make sure that I haven't been, let's see here.
Sorry, Maaza, while you're doing that, can I just respond to a comment that Omar had in the chat?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Just a quick one to say, we will be convening in the next week or two a dedicated session on African manufacturing capacity, because that is an issue that has come up time and time again, and certainly an issue that is being propagated by Western media, you know, really implying that Africa and the Global South does not have the capacity to manufacture. And of course, the tragic irony is that we see one of the countries that have been hardest hit, India, being one of the world's largest manufacturers. So it's also linked to how we understand decolonization of the space, and to constantly challenge narratives that Africa cannot own its own response. Thanks, Maaza.
Thanks, Tian. Can people see my slide now?
Yes.
Okay, and one thing I wanted to address before we do next steps, I did see a comment as well, and I'm not sure who it was from, forgive me, because now, of course, I'm looking at my PowerPoint here, but there was a question about addressing hesitancy. And I know that that's a discussion that has been gone over a few times in the People's Vaccine Alliance. Is it the role of the People's Vaccine Alliance to try and address vaccine hesitancy issues around the continent? What the steering committee has decided is that there are so many groups in Africa and elsewhere that are doing a lot of very good work on this, that the Alliance didn't think it was appropriate for them to try and take on that role. But what they will try to do is compile information and include that in the database of information that is available, and try and link organizations in the People's Vaccine Alliance to colleagues or comrades on the continent who are doing good work on addressing vaccine hesitancy. So to the person who asked that question, I hope that answers. The People's Vaccine Alliance at the moment is not trying to focus on vaccine hesitancy, but resources are available, and we will try and compile those in a way that is easily accessible. Okay, so now in terms of next steps, I hope we can spend a good chunk of time on this. Joab and Buba and I had spoken about the possibility of having monthly meetings for African civil society that are working on issues of vaccine equity. And that is whether you're a member of the People's Vaccine Alliance or not. The People's Vaccine Alliance membership is completely, up to you. If you would like to do that, as I said, please email me and I'll facilitate that. And those are bi-weekly meetings. Again, nothing is required. Everybody knows that bi-weekly is quite a bit, but there are bi-weekly meetings for the entire group of the People's Vaccine Alliance. And for those people who have the bandwidth and would like to join the media group, the policy group, the influentials group, those meetings are also available. And the People's Vaccine Alliance is very enthusiastic and keen to have voices from the Global South included in all of those committees and in the People's Vaccine Alliance broadly. So if you are interested, I would encourage you to join. If you're interested and you're not sure and you'd like to talk to me about it, please feel free to reach out and we can have a conversation, and I can tell you how much time it would take and how much your sort of input would drag from your other work. So, but just generally, do people feel that monthly meetings for African civil society on issues of vaccine equity would be helpful? And here, I guess people can chime in or write comments in the chat. And please just unmute yourself. If you're speaking, say who you are and what organization you're from, and let us know what you think about the idea of monthly meetings. The other issues, and just to go over them briefly, we've had a lot of back and forth about the best way to communicate and the best way to share documents. So Joab and Buba and I and Suhail at the moment with Tian just have a WhatsApp group for our own communication. We're very willing to grow that and make it a big WhatsApp group. Our comrades in Asia have set up just a Google Doc that they go in and update on a regular basis every time they have something to say or something happens. So those points 2 and 3 are linked. One is just the regular communication. This webinar is happening tomorrow. There's an action happening in Banjul. This is going on in Nairobi. Joab is in Addis and he's hosting a meeting. Who would like to attend? Those kind of communications. But it's also things like sharing documents. As people have presentations, interesting resources, etc., where can we share those? So maybe if we could address, if you have strong feelings about those 3, please chime in. The regularity of the meetings, the best way to communicate that is really useful for you that you could engage in, and the best way to share and store documents. Would anybody like to chime in? And I actually can't see, since I have my screen here, let me just stop this so I can see does anybody have their hand up? Please feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and chime in. Oh, I see here, Suhail is saying, no, that's not Suhail, that's Akil Mahdi is saying a Google Drive and Google Docs would be the best way to go. Anybody else have strong feelings about that? Suhail says monthly meetings would be good and maybe a Google Doc with constant updates. Okay, noted. Everybody else seems quite relaxed about it. So if Google Docs is the best way to go, And how about something like a WhatsApp group or a Signal group, Google Docs and Drive? Okay, everybody is quite keen on the Google Docs and Drive. Okay, great. And I see that my brother Mukundan here is saying a monthly meeting would be okay. Would people, if we organized a monthly meeting, here I have WhatsApp as a potential backup for communications. So maybe what we'll do is, I wonder if we should, and I know Tian is a big proponent of polls, and maybe we should have just had a poll here today that we could have all had filled in. But you know what we can do is, maybe this is not, we can start with, so we will try and go for monthly meetings, and that's something that I would like to talk about today. I know Friday is very difficult for people, so thank you for allowing us to do this on a Friday afternoon. Going forward, Joab and Buba, we actually hadn't spoken about this, but I was thinking of suggesting maybe the last Thursday of every month and doing that. Would our Thursday afternoons, if we did the last Thursday of every month, and that way kind of a look back as to what happened the month before and a look forward to opportunities and issues for the next month. Do people feel okay about that? Last Thursday of every month, thank you. From Levi, I hear an agreement. So unless we don't hear any very loud objections, here I have Suhail is saying as a Tuesday afternoon. So we'll note either Tuesday or Thursday. And obviously, you know, we will do our best to document the meetings. So that way, even if you do miss one, you know, any of the action items will be noted. And if we do go for Google Docs, you know, they will be saved there. And so at the moment, I think what we will try and do, if people are okay with sharing your phone numbers, we can have a WhatsApp group and a Google Drive and kind of try and have communications on both. And maybe what I'll do is, you know, we already have an Excel spreadsheet from the email that we sent out to all of you. And I will add a column there that says, you know, phone numbers, and maybe put that on the Google Drive. For those of you who feel comfortable sharing your phone numbers, if we promise that we won't call you on Saturday evenings to ask you questions about vaccine equity, then we can have a WhatsApp group and a Google Drive. Here, sending a calendar invite in advance so we can diarize in advance. Yes, thank you, Levi. We will do that going forward for sure. So here, Thursdays are fine, says Sally Jean. Yes, and I think as long as, you know, somebody from your organization can attend, that would be great. I would say don't send you know, I would prefer we'll just, somebody's asking here if they can send the WhatsApp number in the chat group. I will send an Excel spreadsheet around maybe for people to fill, and that way you can just put your information in there directly so we don't lose something in translation. Okay, that's already great. So we've agreed on a monthly meeting that we will send an invite for in advance, and I will go through the chat here, but I'm seeing some votes for Thursdays, others for Tuesdays. If you have very stringent objections to either, please put them in the chat, but we'll either do Thursdays or Tuesdays, and we will send the set meetings in advance with a calendar invite so you can have them saved there. And we will do the WhatsApp group and a Google Drive. Okay, so the next question was the idea of having a steering committee for Africa. I do like the idea of having representation, you know, from all over the continent. And Joab, I know that you had spoken about this. They do have a steering committee in Asia for a smaller group that does meet on, you know, a more regular basis to draft things and follow up. So that's something that we can always decide later. How does a group feel about that? Does anybody have strong feelings, you know, especially for those of you who represent regions? We don't have, do we have Rosemary Mburu, Dr. Mburu on the line today? I don't think we do. But I know that, you know, her group and others that represent regions can kind of speak for quite a few organizations. So any strong feelings about a steering committee that could be responsible for drafting documents and doing more of the hands-on work and then giving feedback to a larger group? Joab, I don't know if you would like to speak to that or if anybody else has any strong feelings. And we can always decide on that later, depending on how the large group goes for the first couple of months. I hear Buba. Buba says, yes, great idea to set up a steering committee. And I think then we'll just have to think about regional representation if we go for a steering committee. And I think then maybe people would need to volunteer themselves, or we could reach out to the regional reps as well and try and encourage them to join a steering committee. I see Ntando's here. Ntando's being quiet. Hello, my friend Ntando. How are you? I'm putting you on the spot. What do you think of the steering committee?
Thank you, Maaza. Apologies, everyone. I joined in late.
You're very welcome. How do you feel about a steering committee in Ntando? What do you think?
Yeah, no, a steering committee sounds like we'll steer us in the right direction. So it makes sense.
Okay, great. So I'm getting a lot of votes. And here perhaps Sally Jean says perhaps people could also sign up to assist with specific tasks. Yes, there are a lot of people who are voting for a steering committee. So I think we'll just have to, maybe we will have to get together in a small group. Those of us who organized today's meeting, Joab and Buba, and talk to our colleagues in Asia and see how they went about the selection of the steering committee and propose that. So please, I would say, Joab, Buba, Tian, can we commit to, along with the report that we send out next week, also making a proposal on how the steering committee, or what our proposal is for how the steering committee will be put together?
I think that's absolutely fine. And I really like Sally's idea of disaggregating perhaps some subcommittees so we don't have things bottlenecked. Yeah, but certainly I think that's a great idea. And hello, Ntando, welcome to the, as a representative of the Vaccine Advocacy Resource Group. So great to see you.
Great. Okay, excellent. So, and that was actually, the last question on here was really about letting people know how to join the PVA, but we've already done that. So amazingly, we've already gone through the agenda items that we had planned. So just to recap, we will commit to sending the slides and a report by the middle of next week to this entire group, as well as an Excel spreadsheet for you to fill in your phone number so we can make sure that we get a WhatsApp group and a Google Doc drive set up for everyone to be able to communicate. We will also send proposals for how the steering committee will be constituted because there's been a lot of enthusiasm for a steering committee. We will also set dates for meetings going forward. And we'll start populating the Google Drive with documents that, at least from the People's Vaccine Alliance perspective, are key opportunities coming up for the next few months. And then we will count on you all to also populate the drive with any documents that you find to be worth sharing. Joab, yes, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I think maybe one more thing, even as we move towards forming the steering committee, if colleagues can start already sharing plans that they have maybe in the coming 3 months, and we can already start looking at how to pull that together. And then if maybe, I don't know when next we're likely to meet, but there are a couple of upcoming opportunities that we can use to collectively do something. So maybe if we can spend like 5 minutes just for people to share any upcoming opportunities that you can all work together. We know that Africa Day is coming up. In Maaza's presentation, she mentioned there's an opportunity that we can do something together. Also, Tian said, posted in the chat about the launch. So maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes to think through what we can do together. The World Health Assembly is coming up, the WTO TRIPS waiver meeting also coming up, so maybe just to brainstorm a little bit what we can already start doing and how we can communicate going forward as we plan for the opportunities before our monthly meeting.
Great. Thank you, Joab. Yes, and I've just reshared my screen again, just to highlight some of the things that, from the People's Vaccine Alliance perspective, are opportunities that are coming up. So it would already be great to know, I mean, obviously, once we have the WhatsApp group and the Google Drive, as Joab has said, we'll really count on you all to share information with us. One, as I said, the People's Vaccine Alliance is very keen to make sure that voices, strategies, interests from the Global South and Africa in particular are included in their strategy. So if there's something that they have missed for May and June, for example, that is not here in this list, please, you can already let us know now, or send me an email, while we are setting up the WhatsApp group. And is there anything that the People's Vaccine Alliance from your perspective has missed as an opportunity that we should add here? So that's the first question. And number two, are any of your organizations already doing something for any of these dates here? So for example, for Africa Day, is anybody in this group already doing something? For the UN World Health Assembly, is there anything happening, in your country level that we should know about? I mean, one, can we support each other? Number two, is there any way that we can publicize or magnify the effect that you are, of the work that you are doing? So please feel free to raise your hand, or just actually, since my screen is up here at the moment, I can actually not see hands. So let's see. Anybody have any activities coming up in May or June that they would like to let us know about? Not at the moment.
Sorry, I've just remembered. I think People's Vaccine Kenya is organizing, it's going to be like a summary roundup session on the 28th of May, if I'm not wrong, discussing all the events in summary. So there'll be, I think some of the facilitators that have confirmed Achal, Prabhala, and Tian also will be present. And there's two more, I'm not quite sure who they are, but once I have full confirmation, I'll just run it through by you all, and then we can pick it up from there.
Great. So, and Suhail, you will share it, once we set up the WhatsApp group, but is this a webinar that's open to everybody or invite only?
No, it's open to everyone. It's summarizing all the events and why these events are important, and the focus on maybe having an Africa-focused call to action. For example, if it's a phones up or an emails up to specific CEOs, or is it different ministers? So it's discussing all the events that you've mentioned on your slide, and then looking for an Africa-focused way forward, but with expert practitioners who know what's happening in terms of policy, the law, medicine. So it's open for everyone.
Okay.
Thanks.
Fantastic. And
Hi,
Suhail,
Maaza.
sorry, and I just want to say, Suhail, obviously that's the kind of activity that would be great to feed into the People's Vaccine Alliance, so maybe anything that comes out of that, any documents that are drafted, would be fed in to make sure that the People's Vaccine Alliance can integrate into strategies going forward. So that's super helpful. Yes, I heard somebody else speaking and I don't know who that is.
Yeah, that's me. That's me, Maaza.
Hi, Buba.
There's Buba. Yeah, we are also in conversation with Africans Rising for the Africa Day celebrations, and we are trying to look at it from the point of view of Pan-Africanism. Why is Africa not able to finance allocation of vaccines for their citizens, so that conversation will grow? So if we farm up the plans, I'll share it with everyone on this platform. But we're in that conversation, and very soon we'll get it finalized.
Great, thank you. How about, I noticed that Frontline AIDS is here, and I know that Frontline AIDS is quite active with the People's Vaccine Alliance. Frontline AIDS, do you have anything planned in May or June?
Hi. I would have to check with Lois, who is the alternate and the one who's leading our efforts. I was just about to type also that there are potentially some unrelated specifically to vaccines and sometimes even to health, but focused on equality. For instance, the Generation Equality event by UN Women that's coming up at the end of June, that might have some opportunities to at least integrate these kinds of messages and have a sort of consistent presence in spaces where there's the potential to meet with people who could push the agenda. So maybe we could discuss further how to integrate messaging into potentially not specifically related to health, but to issues around equality and addressing the concerns of marginalized communities in particular, which is our concern as well.
Yes, and obviously with the links between inequality and COVID-19, that is critical. So thank you very much. Any other people who haven't had the chance to speak yet who would like to chime in? Est-ce qu'il y a des francophones dans le groupe? Vous êtes vraiment, j'ai pas entendu du français. Il y a quelqu'un qui parle français qui est très calme? I just want people to know that if you do have French speakers who are feeling a little bit shy about chiming in, we will do our best in the future to make sure that I did attend one meeting that Joab invited me to where there was simultaneous translation, which is obviously quite a task, but at the moment, s'il y a des francophones dans le groupe qui sont un peu timides, si vous voulez dire quelque chose, je suis ici pour vous aider. I can help out. If there are any other Ethiopians in the group who are being shy, Makonnen is here. Makonnen can help. And unfortunately, I don't speak Portuguese, but if there are some Mozambicans or some Angolans, so please tell your comrades who are not as familiar with English that if they would like to join, but are worried that it's an English-only group, Swahili speakers, we have Suhail, we have Joab, we can make it happen. We have Intando for a wide variety of South African languages. We can make it work. So please make sure your colleagues in the regions know that we will do our best to make this multilingual as possible. Any last comments? We're actually within time. I'm so impressed and so grateful to everyone for having, Viv was telling me that people had logged in 10 minutes before the call. So it's a very enthusiastic group of people. I remember back in the day when USAID said that we couldn't even take our ARVs on time. That's why they wouldn't allow us to get medication, because we didn't respect time. And here we are 10 minutes early for our webinars. So thank you very much, everyone, for being so enthusiastic. Yes, Joab.
Yeah, maybe just to float this idea here, and I know we have discussed it before, the idea of having a joint webinar with between civil society and the Africa CDC. I don't know what colleagues here think about that, and maybe if we agree it's a good idea, and also look at maybe how to bring in the African Union just for a discussion between these agencies and maybe government representative and civil society. If it's a good idea to work towards that, maybe colleagues can share. Yeah.
And you know what I would suggest, maybe as a steering committee, something that we can plan to do is make a list of suggestions of upcoming meetings, because I think we should always have a bit of coordination at these meetings, but maybe we could do half and half of like a topic discussion and coordination. So if it's, joint with CDC, one on, specific on a specific topic that people would like to know more about, we can do that. So maybe Joab, we can propose that as one of the tasks for the steering committee to plan meeting topics going forward. And luckily we have Tian here, who is with the Africa CDC, so that will help us going forward if we decide to have a meeting with them. Tian, any last comments from you? Any last comments? Buba, Joab, Tian, but also I want to give last word. We're in time. Any last comments from anybody before we wrap up?
Thanks, Maaza. Just to say that we do have a series of webinars that are planned in the upcoming 4 months. So
we are late. We are going to the so.
Buba, we can hear Buba. Please mute yourself, Buba. Buba, sorry, Tian, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was just saying that we do have a series of webinars planned during the month of May. These webinars will specifically be unpacking a framework that we have developed. I'm sure most of you have seen. If you have not seen, we're happy to share it. We have developed a framework for equitable vaccine access for Africa. It's a document produced by the AU and the African CDC in partnership with over 1,000 civil society representatives, scientists, researchers, government agencies across Africa. We launched that a couple of months ago, and the purpose of these webinars will be to unpack that framework, and it will culminate in a live session that we'll be hosting with the African CDC leadership, the African Union leadership, and of course some civil society partners. So that's very much on the calendar to culminate in May, to really ensure that the spaces that we occupy within the African Union and the CDC are opened up to broader civil society.
Yes, and we will make sure once we have the Google Doc and the WhatsApp group up and running, we will not miss these meetings. So thank you, Tian, for letting us know about that, and we'll make sure to share those on a regular basis. Final words, please, from anyone? Okay, so we're in time. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming on a Friday. We really, really, really appreciate it. In solidarity for a free and available vaccine for all soon, hopefully. Thank you very much. We really appreciate all of you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maaza.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Love you too.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.